uh, some of the lessons that learned that we had in our degree adoption itself are that change is going to be constant at the community college. And right now, the folks that formed the degrees themselves, I think Allison is the only person that is still here today that was involved. I was a part-time faculty when that was developed, but Allison was the only team member that was involved and was really only at that time was advising, but was not in a leadership role in developing those degrees. So we've had almost a complete turnover. And so preparation for change is one of the things that you need to do, because we know that the staff is going to change. We know the team is going to change, and we know that the leadership is going to change. And so with that, just making sure that that plan for change is going to, or the plan for change and implementation for change is going to be available, is one of the lessons learned that I have had as I've stepped in to assist with the development of the actual degree program several years after the state board approval of the degree and the documentation of the degree development. The MOET degree work began in 2017 academic year and was actually approved in 2017. So we're essentially almost 5 years from the genesis of the work into the implementation of the degree. And that was another lesson, another lesson learned for me was, from what I've seen, faculty tend to have a long duration at institutions. And so really having faculty champions involved and connected to the program is a pretty important element. And I think in this instance, we didn't have a continuous faculty champion through the degree genesis, and we really could have benefited by having a faculty champion or a team of faculty that were helping advise from the degree inception and the degree adoption in through the development of the degree. And my second lesson learned is that degree adoption to graduation is a long process. 5 years is a long time, particularly when you have, let's see, change in team, pandemic, a CTC link adoption, and now the actual degree. That's a few dog years of time from the initial inception to the to graduation. And so just knowing that it is a long process itself. Then as well, one of the key other lessons learned for me is the executive sponsorship is really critical. And so I'll circle back to this at the end, but making sure that you have leadership sponsorship and that you're constantly updating and incorporating leadership on what's happening is pretty important, because we've also had a president and a change in most of our vice presidencies during this time period, and making sure it remains on their radar and that they know what is happening with a pretty significant development of a degree is really important from an institutional focus and resource perspective. And the other thing that for me was a lessons learned is that in some ways, I think that we were having some problems filling one of our bachelor's programs. And I think that the development of these degrees was seen as an opportunity to really help buoy up and build a pipeline for that program. But accelerated degrees need to come from a strong resource perspective. If we're not, accelerated degrees are not a Hail Mary for a program that's really not able to be filled because of the amount of effort that is there and the continuity of advising that's necessary in order to fill those BAS programs. If a BAS program is forming and already has the idea of development of a co-enrollment program, that's ideal. But if we have a program that's already looking at viability, it's a really, really challenging time to try to Hail Mary in an accelerated degree in order to support that program. So moving on, we had the degree adopted. It was, as Allison clarifies, is actually an option off the MOET degree in the state board inventory. And we moved into being able to bring it to our curriculum and instruction group. And this was a really unique time. This was done mid-pandemic, so we'd really hoped that this was going to be done in 2019. Turned out as we made a switch and we got into the pandemic that things kept taking a little bit longer and kept being a little bit harder. And so when we were doing this, one of the things that we did that I think was really, really valuable was that we took some time with our curriculum instruction committee and spent time introducing the concepts that we had in implementing the degree. One of the things with the implementation of our degree is we have several courses that are never actually taught at our college. And this was a lesson learned that we had from when our students were coming through the MOT program. And they had a set of credits that, particularly for their on-the-job training, that were awarded as a block by our credentials group. When that was re-reviewed in the 180 credit, the 2+2 graduation evaluation at the end of their graduation, we often noticed that it caused some challenges, either that or with their related supplemental instruction, to ensure that they had the full 180 degree credit, for 180 credits. So we built the MOET degree specifically to overcome some of those barriers, but that meant we were going to have classes on our books to which students were going to be crosswalked from extra institutional instruction. But we were never going to teach those classes. They were only there to be used for credentialing, or sorry, for evaluation and for transcripting. And so that was a really unique item we were bringing to our curriculum and instruction committee, as they're used to evaluating class that's going to be taught. And so we had to spend some time with them to say, no. We're building a shelf for a class with learning outcomes against which we're going to assess prior learning. And taking the time to work through that with them was really, really important in order to streamline the pathway as they reviewed those courses and understood how they were going to be constructed in order to be placed in the catalog. And so we did that presentation, and then we went through, got the input and questions, and finally put the presentation in front of them. And of course, this was happening all at the same time that we were going through at Seattle College's the CTC Link transition. So the lessons learned that I had through this process was the process through our curriculum and instruction committee was really, really smooth once the work was done to introduce the course construction. They were super supportive. They were amazing to work with, but we had to slow down at first and really take that time to introduce the concepts, because otherwise, when it went to subcommittee, the questions would have come back and we might have been in several iterative loops rather than being able to share and gain understanding so they could effectively evaluate. And then we really needed to plan for flexibility. And we planned for flexibility to serve adult learners. But the way we did that was through offering variable credits and offering courses that were continuous enrollment. And this has been very, very successful, but it challenges some of the structures that we have and kind of the traditional structures that we have within our course catalog, within our listings, and within our course construction. And this is particularly the case that the lesson learned we had there. One of my lessons learned is don't do this in the midst of a CTC Link transition. But with that, we learned a lot of things afterwards, because we had to rebuild the classes twice, and in so doing, we kind of we found a lot of the things that had to do with continuous enrollment or with variable credits that were different from our legacy systems to our CTC systems. So it kind of continues to break the mold of the traditional systems. That said, that's what we need to be doing. What we really need to be doing to create these pathways, and these pathways for adult learners, is challenge some of these existing molds we have to better serve our student populations. And then I think planning ahead, if you're putting in a new program, you're putting in an accelerated program, you're doing a lot of adoption for credit for prior learning, making sure you're having conversations about faculty compensation and about minimum enrollments early is really, really important. Because these are challenging topics that you have, however you're looking at it, within the administration, within the faculty, and within the union. And so knowing that that's going to be a challenge, having those conversations and planning for the implementation is important. And the other lesson learned that I had is that if I had to do this again, I would really spend a lot of time with storytelling. I would develop a really comprehensive presentation that was focused on the story of adult learners and what we were enabling for them in order to have the accelerated pathways, and sharing that again and again with all of our leadership team. So when the questions came up, they were able to do that storytelling. We're challenging a lot of systemic process we have. And every time we try to dig into this, particularly in an equity context, we find barriers. And being able to understand what the story and what the motivation is, rather than just being seen as a team that's always trying to break the mold or make a change or innovate, to state that we're trying to provide equitable opportunities, we're trying to provide opportunities for our adult learners, and we're trying to provide pathways that we really think is the future of education in the community and technical college realm, is pretty important. One of the other things is, for me, I'm an outsider. I'm only in my second year of teaching full-time in the community college, and I taught for 4 years part-time. So a lot of my perspective comes from, I've managed grants, I've led grants, I've done a lot of public-private partnerships, and I've done a lot of work in the private sector and in consulting in the public sector, but I haven't been an inside public sector and an inside community and technical college role for a long time. And so, for better or worse, I didn't know what I didn't know, and kind of plowed into things that I didn't know were a problem. And so that was both a great benefit, but also a challenge, that when I didn't know better, I just kind of plowed ahead and hoping for the best. So I have a couple more slides just to talk about.
Steve, do you mind chime in just for a second back on basically the kind of approval process? One thing that I would add, that was a great overview. One thing I would add to that is, before it went to the Curriculum and Instruction Committee, we did meet with credentials. And we had a series of meetings with credentials to really, and you talked about those challenges with transferring, and that was part of it. I just wanted to be clear that those were a series of meetings with credentials to work out, some of that nitty-gritty of understanding how this actually plays out on the ground. And you need their support. So that's, trying to, what's the value proposition? Why are we doing this? That whole story can help with that too.
Absolutely. Thank you, Allison. And I know Judy has a couple of slides about that as well. But our credentials team are now some of our biggest supporters. And we really, there are sometimes spots where they're trying to uphold rigor and understand how transcripting others will be looked at by other institutions. But we have some great conversations now, and in taking the time to work with them, and I think a lot of that groundwork that Allison was able to lay with our credentials team, now we just bring the hard question forward, get together in a group, and sort it out. And so that's really been valuable to have that relationship as we're going through something that can be really, really tricky. And a lot of folks have talked about a number of those challenges that they're experiencing at their institutions. So now we're going to dive in and talk about degree construction. And I've got a couple of slides here, and then I'm going to hand off to Judy to talk about all of the amazing work that she's been doing as well. So in our degree construction, the thing I'm going to focus in on is our MOET 101 class. And this is our college skills class that we've developed. And the slide in front of you kind of talks about the idealized sequence that our students go through. And on the left, you'll see that we have an MOET 101, or an intro class, college skills class, that is a 5-credit class that is offered in a hybrid context. And the delivery is really meant to prepare students for college success. And we identified this as a gap with our students coming into our BAS program. We had a lot of students that had this MOT degree, and they oftentimes would have, they earned an apprenticeship, sometimes 5, sometimes 10 years ago, picked up the gen eds along the way, or were within a set of the gen eds of completing their associates, and would come into a hybrid program that our Sustainable Building Science Technology is hybrid, where we teach mainly online and meet 4 Saturdays per quarter. And we started to find that some of the barriers our students were facing were around college services, were around digital literacy, were around study skills and college success, and were continuing around just balance, right? So many of our students were taking care of 1 or 2 generations at home, sometimes children, sometimes elders. They were balancing work and school. And so we started to build up the delivery of this course to assist with that, and then also assist with career exploration. What were they going to do once they had this degree? What was the degree going to enable for them? And so with the construction of that course, here were some of the lessons learned that we had. The big lesson learned for me is I'm hearing from students that it is an essential bridge and a huge success. They are really finding it valuable, and they're taking it over 1 or 2 quarters, and they're able to translate what they're doing into practice in their courses. And a lot of them are taking it at the same time they're taking a gen ed. And they tell me often, well, this really helped me. I don't have the Canvas problems I have. I don't have the systems problems. I'm not getting emails from other places. I'm getting all of my email access there and available. So I'm not kind of constantly stumbling over these things. The other thing we have integrated into these 5 credits is a portfolio class. The students develop their portfolio that will be reviewed for prior learning assessment as a 1-credit module within this class. And I work with them to guide them on the development of that portfolio. And we've done that in both of our, both the MOET and the SBST program, and found that as a key cornerstone for success for prior learning assessment. Having the students develop their portfolio with a faculty member that is compensated to teach the portfolio class and run them through with a set of deadlines and structure in Canvas really assists with success. And I know that there was that discussion that a couple of other colleges, I think Pierce and it was a BTC, are developing these right now. I'd love to talk with you about that offline, because I have some learning there, but I'd love to see what you're doing. And we're also have been rolling this out with a partnership with Kale, that we're looking to roll some additional standards out institution-wide. So we may be able to share some knowledge in that area. So the other lessons learned we had with the construction of our MOET 101 were that this is inherently differentiated instruction. And you have to go in knowing you're going to be differentiating your instruction. I have students that really haven't used modern computer systems in a decade, and I have students that could teach the course and have been teaching me things about our modern computer systems. And so some students fly through our digital literacy and some really crawl through. And we built our digital literacy program with that intent in mind. But as a faculty member, you've got to be prepared for the fact that you've got to meet students where they're at, and you've got to challenge some of your students. We have some advanced assignments for some of our students, and we're still finding things where they have holes in their understanding, and we're able to challenge them in the digital literacy with those elements. The other part is some of our more advanced students sometimes need to be slowed down, because the one thing I find is they know how to use Google Apps and they have multiple Google accounts, but they don't take the time to stop and register for a Google Suite for Education account that we have at our institution, which they need to access elements that we have that we maintain within the FERPA environment. So they say, oh, I have Google, I know how to do Google. And then weeks down the road or months down the road, they need that Google Suite for Education login, never got it, thought they had it covered, and then can't complete an assignment on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday when we don't have IT or Learning Center support to get them there. So you got to make sure that in the differentiated instruction environment, you're also slowing down some of your faster performers. Another thing that I learned, and I think that's really important, if your institution is doing micro-credentials, you're doing stackable certificates, spend some time casting a big net and figuring out if you're doing digital literacy, and I bet you are in multiple departments across your institution, plus you may have an effort or a third-party provider that's developing digital literacy or other elements to micro-credentialing or stackable certificates. Try as much as possible to coordinate that and to build upon it. We found actually after the fact, we had a quarter out of sync where we had a large initiative to develop an independent digital literacy certificate from a third-party provider, and we'd spent a bunch of our effort and grant time doing it the quarter before. It would have been ideal for us to know that that was available and work together to get a concerted institution-wide digital literacy curriculum that then could also be maintained across multiple departments. The one other interesting thing we found is with an accelerated degree program, make sure you know what's going on. And we've run into at least one student, maybe a couple of others, that are hitting the 15 resident credit requirement. What we have is we have students, particularly in our area in Seattle, where they're taking classes. They might be taking classes at Edmonds, at Shoreline, at Bellevue. They're taking classes at a bunch of local community or technical colleges, but then they realize about this accelerated degree and they have all the credits they need. They have the credit for prior learning, but they can get through our program with only 9 in-institution courses if they have all their gen eds and everything else lined up. But then we hit that they actually can't graduate because they don't have the 15 resident credits at our institution. So if you're doing this and you're looking at students that have been at a bunch of different institutions or transferring credits in, understand how you're going to plan for that and how you're going to advise for it, because you may need to tell them, hey, you're going to have to take a couple of gen eds, you're going to have to do something else in order to make sure you have those resident credits. So we can serve our students really effectively.
Oh, and Steve, and they can't use the PLA credits, the 20 credits towards a resident credit.
Correct. So credit for prior learning assessment, or crosswalk credits do not count as resident credits. So in those instances, just know in your advising intake and analysis that students don't think about it that way, right? If they've taken credits at Bellevue, they don't really understand why that doesn't work at an other state board overseen institution. They kind of say, hey, I took this right here. Why will you not accept it? Well, we'll accept it, but we still have that hard requirement for the 15 credits. So it's just another place to make sure we know we're meeting the students where they're at. And then the last item I'm going to talk about before I hand off to Judy is on-the-job training in the portfolio. I talked about the portfolio a little bit and having them do this one credit in the MOET 101. The big lesson learned I have is, even with developing a portfolio over 1 quarter, it's still going to take students a while to get a fully fledged portfolio that's going to satisfy credit review. I anticipate students take 6 to 9 months to get a portfolio completed. And this is through both my experience in the MOET and the BAS program, is that once they're done with the first pass of the portfolio, they will need 1 or 2 additional passes to get it ready for actual credit review and credit equivalency. So set that expectation with students and know it from the faculty perspective. Have the faculty resources available to support that, because the interesting thing is we're lucky. We have a great faculty compensation model for portfolio review and for prior learning assessment. But that said, faculty doesn't get compensated until students actually pay for the services rendered, and they're paying for the services rendered at the cashier after all of those reviews and revisions have been done. So it is a big outlay for faculty. And currently, I'm working with almost 30 students across 2 programs with prior learning assessment. And when it comes down to that, that is a lot of outlay of effort before you're actually seeing any compensation coming as they're wrapping it up. Students are motivated by a deadline, and the real deadline is when they need those credits on their transcript. And lo and behold, that is 1 day before they expect their graduation certificate to show up for them for whatever reason. So just know that creating the portfolio is important in the class, but it's really going to be the graduation that's going to drive them to get it done and submit it and pay. And then the other expectation that I think is critical for students is that creating the portfolio is often harder than taking the actual class. I've heard this again and again from my students. They think it's the quote unquote easy way out. They think that they can go just write some narratives about their learning outcomes. It will get evaluated. They will get the credits and move on. And I hear every time from my students that when they create the portfolio, they actually document their learning. They bring together this the verifiable documentation, and then have it reviewed and certified. That they often find that is as much or more work than just taking the 5-credit course or the multiple courses that they're seeking equivalency for. So with that, Judy, I'm going to hand off to you, and let you talk some more about on-the-job training and related technical instruction.
Thank you, Steve. So I came on board in October of last year to kind of manage the implementation of the grant, of the degree. And so, all this great work was done to, work with credential evaluation, curriculum, instruction committee, everything was kind of all set to go. But then it's like, okay, so how do you actually make this happen? Get students enrolled and have the degree work. So, one of the things that that I've learned over this last few months is that, awarding the non-traditional credit, there's really a balance between opening the pathways to students and adhering to the processes for accreditation. And also, just making sure that those non-traditional credits, they have the rigor to really prepare them to enter into the BAS program. So Steve and Allison talked about this, it's that you really need to have institutional support for this effort. We worked really closely with the credential evaluation, to make sure that, the ways that we were going to validate the extra institutional credit, kind of met the rigor that they needed in order to grant them the credit in those, the MOET 201, 202, and 203. You need to also work with student services and advising. People need to know that this degree is possible because students are coming. They're not necessarily going to come, directly to me. They may come to the school, and advisors need to know that this is an option for students, right? They might not know. They might put them into an associate's degree where, they have to spend a lot more time. And so we want them, the advisors need to know that this is an option for students. Again, you need to have, your dean and your VPI on your side too. We went through many iterations of, to kind of developing the process for this degree. And finally got the approval by, on all levels, dean, VPI, credential evaluation for the way that we were going to validate our related technical instruction. Because this was, we had more policies around, kind of portfolio, but the extra institutional credit was, we had a lot of work to do in that way. So, one of the things that we realized is that you do have to have a really well-established, PLA or CPL policy and procedures for awarding the credit through the portfolio. You have to have your faculty assessors, you have to have your fee structure for student and faculty compensation. You really need to make sure that all that is in place ahead of time so that it's, it's easy for people and for students and the faculty to be able to do the portfolio. Again, the policy and procedure for awarding extra institutional credit, because there's all types of technical training that people are coming in with. We talked about a little bit about this in our groups about the non-regionally accredited institutions, certifications, industry training, professional development. And there's, students are coming in with a whole variety of different kinds of technical training. So you really need to establish really clear guidelines about, what's acceptable and what's not, and how you're going to validate that. We talked about this too, about the, the PLA credit limitations being limited, but then there's the local college issues, the union, faculty union may not be supportive of it. So, you have to take that into consideration too, when you're thinking about like what percentage of that degree you're going to allow to be awarded through PLA. And one of the things that's been really helpful too is that development of those courses that Steve said, are on the books and are not actually taught, so that those extra institutional credits can be awarded through specific courses that are on the books. So we can look at those trainings, those certifications, and compare them to the learning outcomes in those particular courses. So that's really important as well. Yeah, next slide. And we've already talked about this too, how we use the apprenticeship MOT degree as a model for MOET. I mean, it was really helpful that we already had established processes for awarding the degree with 6,000 hours of on-the-job training and 450 hours of related technical instruction. And this is specifically for Washington State Apprenticeship Training Council approved programs. So it was really great to have that as a model. And this degree is offered in a number of community colleges around the state. It's not just at Seattle colleges. So, that might be helpful for some of those colleges that are looking to, develop their own accelerated degrees to be able to say, hey, we've got this degree already and it's been working. This is like even, an improvement on that degree for people with industry training. And then advising, this is not a standard AAST degree. This is labor intensive. It requires a lot of hands-on student engagement to navigate the degree requirements, the college systems. I mean, you really need somebody to be a student advocate. I mean, I spent a lot of time, verifying credentials, finding out like, did the student actually get this credential? Is the organization that offer the credential, are they approved to provide this credential? I mean, it takes a lot of effort to be able to validate all that extra institutional instruction. So it's this is not something that just your existing advisors are necessarily going to be able to take on in addition to their other advising responsibilities. It also requires a lot of creative educational planning. I mean, you've got, people kind of trying to finish up their associate's degree and co-enroll in the BAS program as well. So, there's a lot of, you have to really be creative in how, because they can't be, if they're co-enrolling and they're taking 10 credits in SBST, how many more credits can you load on to them, right, in order to be able to complete the MOET degree? So, taking into consideration, their work, the load, their family, there's just a lot of work that you need to do to really, again, meet the student where they're at. We talk about that a lot in this degree, and that's really true. And we have a lot of non-local students. We've got students in Hawaii. I've got a student in Spokane, Ellensburg, somebody in Louisiana. So there's a lot of, work to do, and veterans too, making sure that they get access to the financial aid that's available for them. There's just, the advising is pretty intensive. So just something to be aware of too, if you're thinking of developing this type of degree. Next. Can't remember.
Thanks, Judy.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that just two other items and a quick wrap up. The one thing one other thing we learned with the related technical instruction is that we developed our related technical instruction into three key areas against which we were evaluating extra institutional instruction. And if I had to do it again, I would bring a bigger group of subject matter experts together in advance to understand what the total package of areas against which we were going to evaluate and transcript credit were. And so that we had those lined out with courses that we brought to our curriculum and instruction committee, and then we could evaluate credit. Because now, if we have another area we need to add or we need to make changes, we need to go back through the curriculum instruction committee review and make the changes and updates. And so far, we're doing a pretty good job, but we're finding a couple of rough edges as we're going through that. So that was kind of one of the big lessons learned for me, is that if you can cast that wide net and get the input early, you really will be able to move forward successfully. And
Steve,
I think
just one more thing I wanted to add is that, I mean, the students really need to make sure that the students have the verifiable training in their in their portfolio, so to speak. Because we've had some students who, you know, they need 360 hours of training, you know, to be enter into the program. And so many of them, not many of them, but a few, you know, haven't had enough training. And so, you know, you have to be really upfront with them that they need to be able to verify that training. I mean, we can make up some credits through some college courses or some other additional training, but they really need to come in with having that training already in their back pocket.
Absolutely. And I think with that, we're at 1 o'clock. So I just want to say to everybody, thank you so much for attending today. We'll look forward, for those that can, to join us again tomorrow for a wrap up. We'll start with a quick recap and then do some additional breakout session work for the morning together. So thank you all so much. And as you move into your afternoons, and we'll look forward to seeing you again tomorrow.
Thanks all.